Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Giant Pod with me, Andy Wrintmore. My guest this week is Ronald Kessler. He is an investigative journalist. He is the author of 21 non-fiction books. 7 of those are New York Times bestsellers. He's a former writer for The Washington Post. He's since done articles for The Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, and many more. What do we talk about? We talk about a handful of his books. Some of them include The CIA at War, The Secrets of the FBI, In the President's Secret Service, The Trump White House, Changing the Rules of the Game, The First Family Detail, again, that's about the Secret Service. We go into a bit of the Secret Service training, what it takes to become a Secret Service member or operative. I'm not sure what the word is. We talk about the Watergate scandal. We talk about exposés and investigative journalism. We talk about loads of things. It's a really great chat. It's a free-flowing chat. We're just covering all kinds of areas. I'm really grateful to have had so much of his time. It's really, really great to connect and dive into these subjects. So without further ado, here is the episode of The Giant Pod featuring Ronald Kessler. Here he is. Excellent. So yeah, this is the Giant Pod. Welcome. Basically, I talk to people I think are interesting or have had extraordinary lives or careers or are specialists in certain fields, and I think that you pretty much fit a lot of that criteria. So I wanted to sort of get into, it's sort of loosely biographic. So we'll talk about your start and a bit of your life and getting into journalism and stuff, and then I want to talk about some of your books, and then at the end we can maybe talk about what you think of the state of the world today. But we will save that bit for the end, if that's all right with you.
It's very unusual to actually let someone talk who's been interviewed. I went to Clark University in Worcester, Mass, and I was on the school paper, and I did a story exposing discrimination against blacks in rental housing in the area. I would call classified ads for apartments, and I would say, I'm a Clark student. Is it still available? They would say yes. And I would say, by the way, my roommate is black. Is that any problem? 40% said, yeah, that's a problem. This is way back in the 60s. Right. And that was picked up by the local paper, and that led to my journalism career because I just wanted to keep doing that, interviewing people, exposing wrongdoing, rather than being told what to think and what to learn by professors. So I left Clark after 2 years, and I went to the Worcester Telegram, the Boston Herald, the Wall Street Journal in New York, and finally the Washington Post, where I was an investigative reporter for 15 years. And I sat next to Carl Bernstein, and every night Woodward would come over with his Watergate sources, and they would discuss the latest story they're doing for the next day's paper. And so I had a front row seat to Watergate. And then I started writing books. In 1985, I left the Post, and I've written 21 books, nonfiction, about intelligence subjects and current affairs. Several of them have led to various results from crusades. For example, I exposed the fact that the FBI director, William Sessions, was engaging in all kinds of abuses, and that led to him being fired by President Clinton. I also revealed that the Secret Service had hired prostitutes in Colombia when Obama went to visit, and that led to at least some changes in the Secret Service. So that's what I like to do, and it's fun, and I think I like to go for the truth, whether it's from the left side or the right side, and I especially enjoy the FBI subjects. I've written 3 books on the FBI, and one of them actually revealed real information indicating that Woodward and Bernstein's Watergate source dubbed Deep Throat was Mark Felt, a top FBI official. And the way I knew that was I went to interview Mark Felt for one of my books, The Bureau, and his daughter, with whom he was living in California, said, this guy Woodward came out here about a year ago. She wasn't even sure who Woodward was. And he had his limousine parked 10 blocks away. And then he walked to our house. Well, of course, that meant no question. He would not have taken such precautions unless this were Deep Throat that he was visiting. And a year later, Deep Throat came out and publicly acknowledged that he was, in fact, Deep Throat.
And how big of a deal was that? Because I wasn't around for the Watergate scandal, but that's a big deal in American politics, isn't it? Or modern American politics. So how big of a deal was it that suddenly this operative known as Deep Throat has been sort of unveiled to the public? Well,
it was a big deal because ever since Watergate, people had speculated about who Deep Throat was, and it turned out that they really had very little idea. Felt was mentioned once or twice, but most often it was some other person, and so a lot of people were proven wrong.
And what was Deep Throat's role in the whole situation? What were they?
He was the number 2 FBI official at the time, and he was in charge of keeping track of the Watergate investigation and what the FBI agents were finding out. So he knew everything. It was just unbelievable. Woodward first met him when they both were waiting for something at the White House, and Woodward struck up a conversation. Woodward, is very bold, as you can imagine, and a lot of us would have been afraid to even try to talk to or call the number 2 official in the FBI, feeling that they would, he would never talk to me. But Woodward is always jumps into the fray, and I have a lot of admiration for him. And in fact, he was best man at our wedding. I was on his investigative team, and so I have a lot of admiration for Woodward.
You're a powerful man, Ron.
I just like to have fun.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I've got a small list of some of your books that you've written here. Like you said earlier, 21 non-fiction books, 7 of them New York Times bestsellers. There's a strong theme here. They're very presidential. They're very CIA, FBI based, Secret Service based. When did your fascination with everything presidential and high government begin? Is this a childhood thing? Do you have strong memories of watching presidential speeches at home and just being in awe of the how big a deal that everything is, the pomp and the pageantry of it all?
No, I think it's more that I love to uncover secrets that are relevant and important, and that's why I choose subjects like the FBI, CIA, Secret Service, and the White House that are momentous and secretive agencies that are prone to abuse from time to time, and those are things I want to expose. But I also like to reveal how they work because they are so secretive. Of course, now more secrets come out than when I started in journalism, but still there's so many secrets, and they are, of course, still subject to abuse. And so that's what is my guiding principle when it comes to choosing book subjects.
If you had to start again, do it all again, would you want to be part of the CIA? Does that part of you that wants to uncover secrets and investigate things, does that part of you wish to be involved and to be an agent in that world? Or do you like that sort of that thrill of the hunt, that kind of trying to catch them slipping, trying to figure out what you can find? Is it that it's so sealed off and secretive historically that makes you so curious and fascinated in it?
Well, I've certainly, dreamed of being an FBI agent or a CIA officer, but no, I would not want to do that because in my present position as a journalist, I'm free to write and say whatever I think is correct and true, and that's not something that you can necessarily do in a bureaucracy. So I'm a very independent person. I like doing exactly what I'm doing now.
What is it about the CIA and the FBI? You know, what is it that when you said you've kind of dreamed about it? What are the what's attractive about these things to you?
Well, certainly the idea of tracking down and arresting a spy, for example, within the CIA or within the FBI, like Robert Hansen, is tremendously satisfying, and that I would love to be a crusader and a Superman and do all those things. Not to mention learning about some of their methods, but I like exactly what I'm doing. I started in this arena with an article in a local publication in Washington called Regardes. The editor noticed a very small story in the Washington Post about an embassy employee in the Russian embassy or Soviet embassy at the time being expelled by the FBI over spying. And this editor said, "Gee, I wonder how they do that." Well, this had never been explored before. I mean, nobody had ever done an article or a book that actually reveals how they go about doing this, what the parameters are, because it was so secret, especially back then. And so I did this article, and I got the cooperation of the FBI, counterintelligence people. Those are the people who look for spies, and they shared a lot of the secrets. After the story came out, there was some consternation. There was criticism within the FBI. You shouldn't have let him know all these things. But that really got me going, and I've just enjoyed it ever since.
So the first book you wrote, what was the first book you wrote about the FBI? It was the Inside, was it called Inside the Bureau?
It was actually called Spy versus Spy. That was my wife's title. My wife is wonderful. She's also a former Washington Post reporter. And she wrote a book, by the way, called Undercover Washington about spying in Washington, undercover locations. And she came up with the title Spy versus Spy. And it was simply on the FBI's counterintelligence program. And that really is still the only book just on that subject. And that went into how the FBI caught brand name spies like Walker and Pelton and other well-known spies. And since then, I've written, I think I said, a total of 3 FBI books. And I've gone into other more recent spy cases, like Robert Hansen, who was an FBI agent who spied for Russia and the Soviet Union, and Aldrich Ames, who was a CIA spy. And actually, the most incredible story of all was about Karl Kosher and Hannah Kosher. That is not a brand name, but Karl Kosher was a Czech intelligence service officer who reported directly to the KGB during the Cold War and managed to get a job at a highly classified level in the CIA. And so he was reporting to the KGB all these secrets from the CIA. Finally, the FBI did catch up with him, and he was he was sent back to Czechoslovakia. He was barred from ever coming back to the U.S. Eventually, he was traded for Sharansky. That's how high level he was. And Karl and Hannah had a very unusual activity. They liked to go to sex orgies and sex parties. And part of that was actually to pick up information, because some of the people attending these parties were Defense Department employees or even White House employees. And they would, have sex, and they would get together, and there was an implicit blackmail involved, because these people were not supposed to be doing that if they were government secret, with classified clearances. And I and my wife, Pam, actually got to interview Carl and Hannah in Prague after they were sent back. And that was before they were, after they had been traded. So we spent a week running around, going to museums, interviewing them. Hannah is gorgeous, big blue eyes, blonde. And he had actually compromised a Russian spy by the name of Ogorodnik. And when the KGB closed in on Ogorodnik said, "Yeah, I'll give you a confession, but please bring me my Montblanc pen so I can write with the confession." They did. Concealed within the pen was a cyanide pill, which the CIA had provided for him. He took it and he died. That's how dramatic this story was. So that's one of the stories that I relate in my latest book, The Secrets of the FBI.
That's incredible, isn't it? I wonder what's going through their minds at that point where they're like, okay, well, this is it. Going to take the pill. Going to go. Well,
I think he felt it was preferable to be an executor or hard labor for the rest of his life. People who choose to be spies and take that risk understand that they could be killed, or they may have to make that decision about committing suicide. They do it often for money, but also because they believe that their own system is rotten.
What sort of qualities or traits do you believe are common across all spies? I mean, you clearly seem to have a lot of knowledge in sort of espionage and clandestine deals and whatnot. So what are the common themes that you've seen across all spies? Because I know with like Hollywood, James Bond, he's probably the most famous spy, or Jason Bourne. There's a psychopathic thread going through them, but they're obviously on the right side of history, or their psychopathy. So what do you think is I think intelligence is probably a big one, but there has to be a certain amount of fearlessness and a lack of empathy to be able to get through those situations without, breaking character or whatever.
Well, it is incredible, when you think of not only the risks, but the secret life that they have to lead, and that goes for our own CIA officers as well, and KGB officers. Those are the people who do have diplomatic immunity. So if they are arrested, they're traded. They're not executed, as opposed to the people that they recruit, like a John Walker, who can be in prison. He's in prison or executed. But I think patriotism is part of it for sure, and a willingness to take risks way beyond anything we could imagine, I think, and an attraction to the excitement of being a spy, of working undercover, not upset about having to lie to people all day long because their real identity is kept secret. Some of them are a little wacky, but most of them are, very upstanding people. And a lot of fascinating cases, such as Vitaly Yushchenko, who defected from the Soviet Union. He was a KGB officer, very high ranking, and then he redefected. And there was tremendous controversy about why and whether he would be executed when he went back. And I actually was able to interview him in Moscow after he went back. And what happened was the CIA totally mistreated him, didn't treat him with dignity, which is just unbelievable when you think of how valuable these people are and the risks they take. And I exposed that in my book, Escape from the CIA. There was, and the Russians, the Soviets at the time, didn't want to admit that he had, in fact, defected. They're bureaucrats just like we have bureaucrats, and they didn't want to admit that they were wrong to advance him, and that's why he was not executed. He was allowed to live peaceably in Moscow, and just amazing case.
Do you find that some of these people have very similar backgrounds? Are they generally sort of familyless, or because they have to go off radar, don't they? I think I remember.
Yeah, but actually, most of them are married, and most of them, lie to their spouses. But in some cases, they are allowed to let the spouse in on the secret, but not the children. So they're constantly coming up with cover stories, beyond anything I could ever imagine, to explain, why they have to go out at night at midnight, and it turns out that they're exchanging secret documents in dead drops in the middle of the woods. Very, very amazing. And then, when it comes to the FBI, they've done a very good job of not only catching spies, but also catching foreign terrorists. There has not actually been a successful attack by a foreign terrorist network since 9/11. There have been lots of domestic terrorism incidents, as we see with this Capitol attack. There have been attempts by foreign networks, but actually the FBI has gotten very good at rolling up these plots. And one reason is that after 9/11, the FBI became very, what they call, prevention-oriented. Instead of watching a suspect for years to try to develop enough evidence to bring it to court, they will take the attitude that we have to stop this plot before it happens, no matter what. And so they'll use any means. Maybe they won't arrest them for espionage, or terrorism, but they'll arrest them for some more minor case and send them back. And this has been a very successful way to do it. Another change is that the FBI put in what they call tripwires. For example, they went to explosives manufacturers and other companies like that, and asked them if they would report to the FBI any suspicious purchases, large purchases of explosives by someone who normally, would not have any need for that. And that's been very successful. For example, that allowed the FBI to roll up a plot to blow up George W. Bush's home in Dallas, Texas, and has led to many other plots. And another secret of the FBI, which I just love, is how they break into homes and offices to plant bugging devices without getting caught and shot as burglars. Just unbelievable. And equally unbelievable is that the FBI actually let me in on these secrets. On the record, 4 chapters of my book, The Secrets of the FBI, go into how they do it. And it's a secret team called Tactical Operations, which is a euphemism for bugging and spying. And these secret teams all have cover stories. And if they're stopped for speeding by a police officer, they'll have some fake license, so that they don't actually have to be prosecuted. They will, for example, if, let's say, they want to put bugging devices in the Russian embassy, and of course this is all court ordered, it's all done lawfully, they will stake out the embassy for a few weeks before the break-in, and they'll watch to see who goes in, who goes out. Are there any dogs on the premises? If there is a dog, they will take a photo and show the photo to a veterinarian on contract, and he will prescribe just the right amount of sleeping potion that agents will shoot into the dog with a dart gun when they go into the embassy. And then at the end of the break-in, they will shoot him up again to wake him up because they don't want to have any sleeping dogs left around. And they plant these bugs that are, of course, incredibly small. They actually showed me one which was the size of a postage stamp, literally not much thicker than a postage stamp. It could record for 20 hours or transmit as you wish. It's in one case, the FBI wanted to bug a mob hangout in Philadelphia. So how do they do that? Well, they didn't want to go in the back door because that could be booby-trapped. However, this installation, it was an electronics store, but it was really a mob hangout. It overlooked an all-night bar. So how's the FBI going to go in the front door without being seen by people in the bar? What they did was they rented a metro bus, a local bus, and they got in the bus, and the bus went around the block and dropped off the agents in front of the front door, and then stayed there so that the bus blocked the view of people at the bar. However, the bus went by a bus stop on the way, and these two people from the bar who were waiting were outraged that the bus didn't stop to pick them up. And they ran to the bus when it stopped and ran into the bus. And the agents didn't realize that they don't belong with them because the agents were either from this tech ops or tactical operations team or from the local field office. So they didn't know that these agents are not one of them. But then some of the agents started taking off their weapons, long guns, pistols. And then these guys, my God, they became frightened and they started ringing, let me off, let me off, let me off. And the agent who was driving the bus said, "Hey guys, stop bothering me. I'm having enough trouble driving this bus." But then finally, he did realize that they didn't belong. He opened the doors. They went running out the door. They went running down the street. We never heard from them again. They probably thought it was all a nightmare because they drank too much. The FBI was able to plant bugs in that location.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Tell me about the is it the Banditos? The way they got them?
The Banditos case was a classic undercover operation. And by the way, under J. Edgar Hoover, of course, they never had such things. Hoover thought, if they go undercover, agents would be co-opted, and furthermore, he was very picky about dress. He could never imagine having an agent grow a beard, for example, or go around in anything but a suit and tie with a white shirt. But in the Banditos case, this was a gang that engaged in all kinds of crimes, and including kidnapping. And they would hang out at a bar. And so what the FBI did was they got agreement from this bar that they would hang out at. They would pay the bar to do this. And the agents would pose as bartenders, and they would make drinks for the Banditos. Meanwhile, they would be bugging their conversations, and this, of course, was bugs that would be on their person, but also bugs that were planted in the bar. And so they developed enough evidence to arrest the Banditos, and that was the end of the Banditos.
And what? Tell me about, because the barman was in on it, right? As an agent, all the staff working the bar were agents.
Yeah, the owner was in on it, and but the agents would either replace the bartenders, or in some cases, they would keep the bartenders. It was a combination.
Right, and there was something about they would try to give, because they got quite tight with these barmen who were undercover. The gang members would try and give them gifts, which of course they're not allowed to receive on duty, I guess, which would Why aren't they allowed to receive gifts? Is it because it may be seen as bribery or some sort of like genuine developing friendship? There may be some sympathies that come out of that.
Agents would be allowed to accept gifts, as long as they disclosed beforehand to the Bureau that they were going to accept these gifts as part of the case. And then, of course, they would give the gifts to the Bureau or whatever. It does get sticky when going into a drug ring, and in some cases, the agents are expected to ingest the drugs. And they did get some kind of permission to just take a little bit of cocaine, and then they're tested by the Bureau afterwards, and they're watched by the Bureau afterwards. But that is one problem, and that's another reason why J. Edgar Hoover would not allow these undercover operations until much later in his tenure, which was almost 50 years. And finally, actually, despite the fact that he really was a racist, he gave these off-the-record comments to newspaper editors, and there was just one racist comment after another. But eventually, Robert Kennedy, when he was Attorney General, pressured Hoover to go after the Ku Klux Klan, and he did, and very successfully, using undercover operations where agents would befriend a Ku Klux Klan member, pretend to join the Ku Klux Klan, and then record what was going down and record the activities. And the result was that the FBI actually wiped out the Ku Klux Klan, despite the other side where Hoover unjustly and illegally conducted surveillance of Martin Luther King for no good reason whatsoever.
So you said they got rid of the Ku Klux Klan, but they're definitely still around, aren't they?
Yeah,
so was there some sort of resurgence, or was there enough of them left that they were able to rebuild over time?
Yeah, at this point, they're just a joke. They'll show up at some parade or some demonstration, and but in terms of actually conducting any criminal act, every now and then they might, but then they're arrested. So they're not any kind of threat whatsoever.
So they're not the organized unit they used to be.
Right.
Yeah. I remember seeing a documentary about a undercover. I think he was a police officer. Maybe he was FBI. He was some sort of high-ranking sort of police officer. And he went into one of these biker gangs, and he was presented with a situation where they said, "Oh yeah, do some coke, do some drugs." And this is before, like you said, they gave the agents some leniency. And he said he had to bend over on the table, pretend to snort it with one hand he had to use one hand, pretend to snort it, and then move it all along the table, and then push it off the end of the table into his other hand, which seems like the world's lamest illusion magic trick, doesn't it? And they actually fell for it, and he actually he didn't have to take any drugs. His investigation was not compromised because I think the place they were in was bugged, so there was no way he could have done it off the.
Oh yeah, I hadn't heard of that, but certainly that would be a very approved technique to continue to be an undercover person.
And eventually, I think they pulled him out because he was getting a little bit too deep into the life, I think. Which brings me on to Donnie Brasco. What do you know about the Donnie Brasco sort of stuff? Is that a common occurrence with undercover work that, at some point they say, look, we got to pull you out because you were literally just becoming what you're chasing?
It certainly is a problem, no question, and beforehand they try to choose agents who are very stable and, are not going to fall for some of these things. But that is absolutely a problem, no question.
And how does the FBI and the CIA differ? Because I think because over here in the UK, I think a lot of people get them fairly confused. They do two very different jobs, don't they?
FBI and
CIA.
Yeah. With the FBI, it's all about law enforcement. It's all about bringing cases to court and documenting everything, as opposed to the CIA, which is the opposite. When they operate, in a foreign country, they break the laws of that country every single day. So that's a problem because, again, a CIA officer could start to think he can break the laws in the United States as well, or, of course, spy for the other side, which we see. So all these positions are very dangerous in terms of what the result can be. But speaking of dangerous, the Secret Service is out there every day taking the chance that they're going to be killed. When the president holds a rally, of course, you see them with their pins and their little squigglies in their ears, and some of them wear bulletproof vests, some of them don't, but they're sitting ducks for an assassin. If an assassin is going to go after the president, they certainly would also go after the agents, the Secret Service has had problems with corner cutting and not keeping up with technology and covering up things, such as I mentioned when Obama went to Colombia and the agents hired prostitutes. But generally, they've had a very good record, and they've learned a few things. For example, the reason that Lee Harvey Oswald was able to kill JFK was that agents wanted to ride on the rear running board of his limousine in Dallas. But JFK was very, like all politicians, aware of optics and thought this looked like too much security, and he refused to let them ride on the rear running board. If they had been on the rear running board, after the first shot, which was not fatal, those agents would have jumped on JFK, pushed him to the floor, and he would be alive today because they would have protected him from the second shot, which was fatal. And another example of what really goes on and the type of thing I like to uncover is in the case of the Reagan attempted assassination. The fact that he was going to be speaking at the Washington Hilton appeared in the Washington Post, and the assassin, I read this, Hinckley went to the Washington Hilton, and as Reagan came out of the Washington Hilton, Hinckley was within 15 feet of Reagan and had not been screened, and shot him. And the bullet went within an inch of Reagan's heart. And the reason that Reagan was allowed to come out like that, without any magnetometer screening, etc., is that the Reagan White House staff pressured the Secret Service to allow Reagan to come out to, do a little photo shoot for the cameras. That is why he was shot. And again, this was covered up. The Secret Service lied about it, but it's in my book, The First Family Detail.
And if say I wanted to, say I woke up tomorrow morning and I go, you know what, I want to join the Secret Service. I probably can't because I'm not a US citizen. But let's just say hypothetically, what sort of like the spies question, what sort of people are they generally hiring? What are the qualities they're looking for? Are these ex-special forces guys, ex-police, ex-close protection guys in maybe private security firms? What's the skill set of these guys?
Yeah, about a third of them are former military, and then a lot of others are former police officers, not private security. And then there are others who are none of those. And in those cases, they really are patriotic because they understand that they may have to take a bullet for the president. And what can be more important than protecting our president if we're American citizens? An assassination nullifies democracy. So that's the type of person that takes that job. And of course, they go through training. I went to the training center with my wife, Pam, saw how they do various scenarios. And the key is, first of all, to do advanced work. If the president's going to speak, let's say in a hotel, the agents will scope out the hotel. They'll have dogs sniff for explosives. They'll locate secret exits that are not that obvious. They'll take account of any firehouses nearby so that they can escape if they need to a firehouse. The key is always to get the president out as quickly as possible, not to engage in some gun battle. But in addition to their pistols, they also have what are called counter assault teams who have long rifles and are there in case there is a confrontation. In addition, there are counter sniper teams that appear on the rooftops. So if someone comes out of the Washington Hilton, if the president comes out, they will be there on the rooftops to take out any possible assassins. There's also the issue of food. If the president's going to eat in a hotel, the agents will check out the backgrounds of the chefs and the waiters. Navy stewards will serve the food to the president. Agents will watch as it's prepared in the kitchen. And then in the hotel itself, the Secret Service will rent the floors below and above where the president's going to be staying, as well as the whole floor where the president is staying. They'll check out the suite where he's going to stay for bugs. They'll take apart, paintings. They'll look under carpets. They'll put bulletproof material on the windows. They'll take the TV out and they'll replace it with their own TV, which is not full of bugs. So very intricate and very different from the JFK days when there was really no advanced preparation like that.
So do you think when a hotel hears that, Biden is coming to town and he's going to be making some sort of speech or an address, do you think they think, oh, for God's sake, here we go? Because they're in there, they're ripping up the carpets, they're pulling the paintings off the walls. Do they leave it as they found it? Do they sort of bill, does the government pick up the tab for that? It must be a ball ache.
Yeah. No, they do have to leave everything as is. In the case of paintings, they would actually x-ray them, they wouldn't tear them apart. The carpets they would replace. And that's very much part of their job, and that's why they rent these locations, such as I mentioned, from Biden when he was vice president, and the toilet facilities for the Kushners, so that they can maintain their operations without interfering with the people that they're protecting.
Right. So give me some juicy Secret Service anecdotes. Give me some juicy gossip that you've found throughout your research when you were writing your book.
Well, that's certainly one of the reasons that I love to do my two Secret Service books, In the President's Secret Service and The First Family Detail, because agents are like secret surveillance cameras. They see everything that goes on with the first family, and and it's often incredible. For example, Hillary Clinton is so nasty to her agents. She's still protected because she's the wife of a former president. So nasty that being assigned to her detail is considered a form of punishment within the Secret Service. She will just blow up with them for no reason, and doesn't want military or police at her events. Just has this hatred of law enforcement. On the other side, Obama and Michelle are very considerate of agents, respect them. Trump is as well, and the Bushes are as well. The Bush's two kids were difficult, though, that when they were teenagers, Jenna and Barbara Bush, they would actually try to lose their agents. They thought that was great fun. They didn't like to be protected, even though the agents would dress up like teenagers. They would dress in jeans, but Jenna especially would even try to lose them. As she left the White House, she wouldn't tell them when she was leaving. They would have to do surveillance of her car to find out when she was leaving, and then she would actually go through red lights trying to evade her agents. So that was, and then Bush didn't side with the agents when the agents complained. He sided with Jenna. So a lot of unforeseen difficulties in being agents. But here's a really incredible story. When George H.W. Bush was going to campaign in Enid, Oklahoma, this was his second campaign, the agents went out and did their usual advance work, and they checked with local law enforcement. Are there any threats out there? And local law enforcement said, there's this psychic in town who has just been incredibly accurate in helping us. She has actually brought us to the graves of murder victims. She's predicted all kinds of things that turn out to be true. And she said that she sees Bush being assassinated by a sniper on an overpass as he's going back from his speaking engagement to the airport. So the agents, were embarrassed to take this seriously, but they did. And they went and interviewed her, and they said, can you show us where the presidential plane is going to be and where the limousines will be? And she said, yeah. And so they went out to the Air Force Base, and she said that's where the backup plane is, and that's where the limousines are going to be or are already. And she was right. And so she also said when Bush comes out of the Air Force One, he's going to be wearing a sport jacket and a sports shirt. And they thought that's crazy. He always wears a suit and tie. So again, they didn't take it too seriously, but they did tell headquarters. And then the next morning, Bush came out of Air Force One, and he was wearing a sport jacket and a sport shirt.
No.
And so, really, this is true, and this is on the record from one of the agents who was there. And so a shiver went down their spine, and they changed the motorcade route back and forth so that it would not go under any overpasses. Yeah. And of course, he was not harmed. He was not told about it at the time. He read about it for the first time in my book. People always say, well, did they go see if there were any snipers on any overpasses? No, they didn't. They were just concerned about protecting Bush.
So Bush has read your book?
Yeah, I sent it to him. I got cooperation from the Bush family for my book on Laura Bush. So I was able to get to know them.
That's amazing. That reminds me, that sort of psychic thing reminds me of a story of my great-grandmother. She was reading the local newspaper, and in the local newspaper there was a young couple, happily married, newlyweds. And she did this thing with like tea leaves, where depending on how the tea leaves sit in the bottom of the mug or the cup, you read them somehow. I'm not sure how you do it. I've never done it, but her interpretation of what she was reading was saying death, because she wanted to see what their future held. And it said death, and she thought, no, this can't be right. So she did it again, and it said death again. And the bride died, and they buried her in her wedding dress.
Wow. Oh my God.
Weird.
Yeah.
Strange, right? Are you a believer in these things, or like in the CIA or any government things? Do you ever get into the whole? Do you ever chase the aliens thing, or the Men in Black thing, or whatever?
No,
do you ever like?
No, I don't get into any of that right-wing conspiracy stuff, but in the case of psychics, as you can tell from that story, they actually have turned out to be right. And law enforcement does consult with psychics. So however it works, we don't know, but they definitely can be valuable. I did the first story about the FBI's profiling program, criminal profiling program, back in 1985 at the Washington Post. Of course, now the term has taken on a pejorative meaning, but real FBI profiling is very, very helpful in coming up with a suspect, just from little clues and then tracing that back to previous cases and what that might mean. They're able to narrow the focus of an investigation, and they'll say the perpetrator lives nearby. The perpetrator is between the age of 20 and 30. The perpetrator, went to have a hot dog after. Not quite like that, but a lot of fascinating clues that have led over and over again to arrests of murderers and serial killers and others who break the law.
And for any listeners who want to know a bit more about FBI criminal profiling, if you have Netflix, go and watch the show Mindhunter, because that essentially chronicles the beginnings of that department. I guess it was a department, wasn't it? That was always fighting for funding and.
Yeah, it is based at Quantico, Virginia, where the FBI training center is. And as in doing my books, the FBI let me sit in on classes there and gave me firearms training at the rifle range. So I really got to experience some of what they do.
So give me an example of, because I think that the profiling stuff is really fascinating, because it's essentially you're creating a psychological, it's guesswork, isn't it? But it's sort of deduction. So you're looking at where maybe if we're talking about a serial killer, and you look at the methods of execution, the time of day they do it, the kinds of places they do it, and then they would maybe try and triangulate. They'd look at all the different places the crimes have been committed and see if there's any sort of, they must be sort of in this area because they're never committed any more than 10 miles away from this town, let's say.
Yeah.
And then they get to figure out whether they're black, they're white, if they've got maybe religious beliefs, if they still live with their parents, what sort of job they'd have. How do they manage to be that precise?
I haven't checked in on that subject recently, but let's say just by the method of murder, one type, is it someone who sticks around afterwards and takes food from the refrigerator. Typically after committing a murder, a serial killer will be so exhilarated that it's always a he, will act in an aberrant way, so that the family, his family may notice differences, I would have to go back to my book to remember some of the details of this, but it's a combination of, looking at the crime scene, looking at the method of murder, and comparing that with previous cases and what they led to.
Because if you were, so they generally sort of strangulations are considered to be crimes of passion, aren't they? So they're generally linked to adultery or killing of girlfriends, mistresses, spouses, whatever. Whereas if you shoot someone, it's considered to be slightly colder, isn't it, and more disconnected because it's not as physically involved.
Yes.
Let's say, and these are all the clues they use. I find that really fascinating. I absolutely love that show. Like I said, Mindhunter on Netflix. Whew. How much of that show, I don't know if you've seen it, how much of that show is sort of fiction and how much sticks to the timeline.
Yeah, I haven't watched it. I rarely watch FBI scenario, recreations because invariably they're not correct, and that just irritates me.
They annoy you.
Why should I want to know the real story?
Yeah. You were there for it. So what is the book you'd say you're probably most proud of? What's the one you had the most fun with? And if you could do a sequel to it, you would go and do another one.
It's like asking which of your children is your favorite. I loved every one of them. And I loved pursuing everything that I tracked down. But one of the things I'm proud of is when I was at the Washington Post, I did a story revealing that the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, refused to allow a Black woman who had the correct lineage going back to the Mayflower, refused to allow her to join because she is Black. And I interviewed the president of the DAR, and she basically said that outright. She said, not everybody can be invited to parties. We choose based on a lot of criteria, and that could be one of them, that she was Black. Well, that was a page one story in the Washington Post that led to tremendous changes in the DAR. The president had to resign, and the woman, Lena Ferguson, the Black woman, was admitted. Not only that, but she was made chairman of the scholarship committee. The DAR had to implement all kinds of procedures to encourage Blacks to join, and so that's one of the things I'm proud of.
So you have a bit of a civil rights theme throughout your career, don't you? Because you mentioned earlier in your beginnings was it a college newspaper you said you were writing for?
Yeah.
That you were fighting for their rights and equality then, and exposing racism, and I guess it's systematic racism, isn't it? That you've dealt with in a way.
I don't know about that term. It certainly was racism. It certainly was widespread, given that 40% of the people I called said it would be a problem to have a Black roommate. And,
right.
I think that's the best way.
But the fact that they would have had the power to do that, to grant someone that a room or a building, to rent something, the fact that they had the choice to say yes or no based on their personal bias and bigotry would be evidence of systematic racism, wouldn't it? Or it being allowed to happen.
Yeah, that's right. And there were discrimination laws, and the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination began an investigation after my story ran, and I think they did actually try to take some measures against the people that I named in the story as saying, no, I won't rent to a Black person. The term was Negro back then. But it's not like that today. Things have changed a lot, but certainly it exists.
And are moments like that the sort of the proudest moments of your career, or do you take more satisfaction from something that's sort of not bringing down the man, but something a little bit more salacious, or maybe not salacious, that's not the word. When someone from the CIA gets a wrist slap because of something that you found out, do you get a bit of a buzz off that, or would you rather what you do have more of a social impact, like what you just mentioned with the DAR?
Well, it's a combination. Whatever is a good expose, whatever is revealing, whatever reveals wrongdoing or something that needs to be changed. Probably the biggest expose I did was of William Sessions, I mentioned before, the FBI director, and he was just abusing his position right and left, using FBI resources for personal gain, and allowing his wife to have access to classified information. It was just unbelievable, and I exposed that in my book, the FBI, the world's most secret, world's most powerful law enforcement agency. And it took a while before he finally was forced out by President Clinton. He didn't want to resign, and a Justice Department investigation was started. But that was certainly one of the biggest thing that I ever exposed.
And your newest book, or your latest book, is the Trump White House Changing the Rules of the Game. Now, and at the top of the book, it boasts that it's one of his earliest on the record interviews as president. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was the only interview he'd given for a book as president, and I'd known him for 2 decades. I first got to know him and Melania when I did a book on Palm Beach called The Season, which boy, that was fun. Just going to cocktail parties, drinking champagne, and that in a way is also a secretive society, because they have what they call the old guard, which is very blue blood and anti-Semitic and certainly anti-black. So I got to know Trump back then, and on the way down, he flew my wife Pam and I on his plane on the way down to Mar-a-Lago to spend the weekend. And on the way down, he imitated the nasal constricted tones of these blue bloods, condemning his club Mar-a-Lago because it admits blacks and Jews. And some clubs in Palm Beach to this day, would you believe, do not admit blacks or Jews. They're allowed to get away with it because they don't have any federal involvement. They're just private clubs. And so I exposed that in the book, The Season. And so I got to know at least one side of Trump, but as we know now, there's another side that is quite scary.
So, would you say? And I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to catch you off guard or catch any sort of like sound bites that will, that would misrepresent you here, because I know that you must be wary of some journalism, but the last few weeks of Trump's presidency with the Capitol, the siege on the Capitol and the insurrection, did your opinion of Trump change in those months and weeks while all that was happening? Was there a part of you that said, "This is not the man I knew"?
That's right. I certainly knew and did write about in that book, The Trump White House, some of his other flaws, lying, serial lying, and attacking law enforcement at times unjustly, although in some cases it was valid. But no, this was off the charts. Not only the rally itself, but fabricating the story that the election had been stolen, putting that in these people's heads, and then the rally itself saying go to the Capitol, fight, and then as the violence was occurring and he was watching on TV, not even trying to call them off and saying go home. That I think everybody is 100% universally against that, except some of these crazy people. So that
Cruz.
That was a bridge too far for me.
Mm. So tell me about this interview in this book, because this book is what, 2 years old now?
Yes.
So he was in the slap in the middle of his presidency. So how does that come about? How do you go about securing the is it currently the only? Well,
since then he did an interview with Woodward for his book, but
right.
At the time it was the only one.
Okay. So tell me how that comes about. How set the scene for me. Tell me how you go about interviewing a president, especially a president like Donald Trump, who is unpredictable,
to say the least. Ever since I did get to know him 2 decades ago, I had kept in touch with him. I did stories about him. I did interviews with him. Back in 2011, I did a story headline, "Don't Underestimate Trump for President." And I'm so a little proud of that in terms of, predicting that he would run. So I kept in touch with him and his people, and Eric Trump and some of the others. He would let us go to Mar-a-Lago. We would pay for meals and parties, but we were able to go once or twice a year, and I would see him there. So I kept in touch, and then the interview took place at Mar-a-Lago, and I had been trying to get an interview through the usual means without success, but he was having dinner with Melania and a few other people, and we were having dinner with other friends nearby, and Pam and I, near the end, went up to him and asked for an interview, and he agreed. And at first he said, let's arrange it tomorrow. And then Melania said, why don't we just get our body man who was there, and he can arrange it. Because, I think Melania likes us and we like her. And then Trump said, no, let's just do it now. So we went off in a corner of the room, and I turned on my recorder and did an interview for about a half an hour. And he didn't say anything startling, but it certainly added to the book.
And although you said, you've known him for a couple of decades, 20 years at this point, are you nervous because he's the president? Does that make you see this person slightly differently, or is he sort of like, your old acquaintance, Donald?
That's right. I wasn't nervous. I don't know if I get nervous when I interview people, but Trump, would act just the same way he did when we first went down with him. Very direct, very candid, cracking jokes. A little praise here and there, especially about my wife. So that was not any different after he became president.
I see. And what's the security like around Donald in a situation like that? Because you've been able to just go off to the side, haven't you, and just do this interview. Does he sort of have one Secret Service guy that he dictates his will to, or he says, we're going over here and doing this now, and then that gets circulated amongst the team? Or what's the situation? Because it seems like you've kind of not bumped into him, but it sounds like you've met him at this party, this function. It all seems quite relaxed.
Yeah. Well, first of all, to get into Mar-a-Lago when he's there, you have to go through a Secret Service background check and go through magnetometers. And in addition, we were registered in their database, or club members are registered. And when it came to actually talking to him, he and his table were surrounded by 4 or 5 agents, and there was also a rope line around the table, and so he had to give the word to the agents to allow us within the rope line and to talk to him, and that's the way it works. Another time we talked to him at the golf club buffet, which is part of Mar-a-Lago in West Palm Beach, and that was last March. And he called us over, but he had to give the word again to the agents. There were agents there also to protect his kids who were with him. Some of his kids were with him at the table, and that's the way it works. But again, to get into the golf club, you have to go through metal detectors. They check your car for explosives, open the trunk, open the hood. Dogs sniff for explosives. So there is a lot of security.
And you said that you had to really kind of pursue him, but you tried the obvious or the official channels to get this interview.
Yeah.
As a journalist and as an investigative journalist, how How long do you try before you say, okay, this isn't happening? What's the limit where you go, I'm not getting this story? Or do you always think, okay, there may be a way around with this guy, or what if I whisper in this person's ear, or maybe a nicely placed email or a letter here? What's your process? What are you, like a dog with a bone, or?
Yeah, I try not to be a pest, and so if I'm trying to get cooperation from a White House PR person, I'll call or email several times, but I won't keep it up. But I might, if I'm being rebuffed, I might later come up with a different angle to present as a subject for an interview. So that's another way around it. But generally, I have the luxury as a book author, as opposed to a daily journalist, of burrowing into a subject and getting a lot of cooperation just based on the fact that I'm interested in how they work, how the FBI does their profiling, how the CIA does their work, or Secret Service, and they appreciate that. They appreciate that I'm not necessarily looking for some expose, but rather to explain how they actually do their jobs. And so that helps get cooperation and ultimately gets interviews. So in the case of the CIA, I've done 2 or 3 books on the CIA, and they have cooperated and have allowed interviews, including of the director. And part of it is that. Part of it is my track record. Even though I have exposed institutions, and some of them I mentioned. I think they respect the fact that I'm honestly trying to do a job of explaining how they operate.
When you just said exposing institutions, it made me wonder if, how many enemies do you have? Do you worry about making enemies, or or do you find it a regrettable, byproduct of the work that you do?
Certainly, that goes with the job of what I do. At the same time, I do get a little antsy about 1 or 2 people every now and then, not high-ranking people, but people who just may be unbalanced or whatever, that might be a threat. And so, I try to be careful and take certain precautions. No question about that.
Tell me about Biden's skinny dipping.
In my Secret Service book, The First Family Detail, I interviewed the agents who were on his detail, and they said he generally is considerate, except that he will suddenly decide to go back to Wilmington, his home, sometimes several times a week, without giving any advance notice whatsoever to agents, so they can never plan their social lives. But the female agents on his detail were offended that he would skinny dip both at the pool, at the vice president's residence, and at his home in Wilmington. They signed up to take a bullet for the president, but not to see Joe Biden naked. And that story was picked up quite widely.
Oh, there are some things they are prepared to do, like give their life for him, but see his cock is not one of them.
Right.
That's hilarious. I wonder what sort of other embarrassing, very human things Secret Service agents are privy to, because as I understand from interviews I've seen with Michelle Obama, they're just everywhere, and they can't decide to. She couldn't even decide to go for a walk around the grounds without someone needing 15 minutes to arrange it for her. I just wonder, they must see some stuff. They must become very, very, they must start the job off being like, this is the president. Yeah. This is the leader of the free world. And then by the end of it, they must have a very, very, very intimate understanding of these people as human beings.
The First Family does have privacy in the residence itself. The agents don't go in there, but they certainly see a lot. They saw Obama smoking secretly, trying to hide it from Michelle, which he finally talked about in his latest book. So, habits like that, not only the president, the vice president, but the children, cabinet officers. There's a wide range, and I go into a lot of that in the Secret Service books. It is incredible what they see.
Yeah. So, sticking with Biden, what are your thoughts and feelings on Biden as the 46th president now? 46?
46.
Are you hopeful? Are you a fan of his? Do you expect him to achieve a lot? What are your feelings on that?
I do like the fact that, he seems to be a decent person. He's not engaged in serial lying. And it seems that he's somewhat moderate. The liberal measures he's taken so far seem to be sort of around the edges. Whether he joins the climate accord isn't going to make any big difference to this country. In fact, our carbon emissions tied to human activity have been going down, including during the Obama administration. But he's not an angel either, because in today's Washington Post, one of the lead stories about the COVID vaccines quotes him as saying, that the Trump rollout of vaccines has been a disaster. And then the next paragraph says that he promises to have 1 million inoculations a day. And the paragraph after that says, however, the Trump administration is already doing that. In fact, on the most recent day, Thursday, there were over 1 million inoculations. So, he's trying to pull the wool over our eyes. And I do see from my Secret Service books that he is certainly capable of covering up things. I found that when he was vice president, he would go back and forth to Wilmington several times a week, as I said, and he would use an Air Force jet, and that was charged to the taxpayer. And so during several years, it was $1 million to flying back and forth. And then his people lied about it. They would, they tried to cover up the figures, which I got under the Freedom of Information Act. And then another very, very chilling fact, which has not been widely picked up, is that when he would go back to Wilmington, he would insist that the military aid with the nuclear football remain at least a mile behind from his motorcade.
Just explain for the listener what the military football is.
Right. Military football, there's a lot of misinformation about it, but it allows secure communications between the president and the Pentagon in the event of a possible attack by a foreign country. And the president verifies or validates his identity before speaking on these secure lines by looking at a card which has codes, and he carries us with him all the time, and he enunciates the codes, and that verifies that it really is the president. And then the Pentagon tells him what is going on, and he may only have 5 or 10 minutes to make a decision whether to do a counterattack, and if so, how broad should this counterattack be? And yet, Biden would insist that the military aid remain a mile behind, which meant that even if there's no traffic, there would not be time to launch a counterattack if Obama had been taken out first, which certainly would be possible. And the reason was that he wanted to preserve this image as regular Joe, a man of the working people. He didn't want to have a long motorcade, which is normal, normally maybe 25 cars. And so he wanted the military to stay behind. And what could be more shocking than that? Putting all of us at risk. It's a mystery to me why that hasn't been picked up. but I think it eventually will be.
Fascinating stuff. You certainly know a lot. You know an awful lot.
I do, and it's a lot of fun.
Do you have any advice for aspiring investigative journalists? What would you say to someone who wants to follow in your footsteps and do the kind of work that you've done?
I think, first be objective, because you want to choose subjects that are real valid exposés and not some kind of political hit piece. And secondly, show that you really are interested in how this institution or this person operates, and both the good and the bad, and study the subject so that you are well prepared when you do interview people. Those are some of the basics.
Proper planning and preparation prevents piss poor performance.
Right.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been really good. I've been watching interviews with you on YouTube all day.
Wow.
Leading up to this. I feel like I've been listening to you all day, but it's nice to finally actually have my own conversation with you.
You did a great job. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
I conducted this.
One more question for you. What is the book that you're writing next, or what is the book you would like to write next if you're not already doing it?
I am looking for tips. I haven't chosen a new subject. It becomes more and more difficult because so much does appear in the papers all the time, and so many secrets are out there. But if the right subject comes up, I'll jump on it.
Aliens, Ronald. Find us the aliens. If anyone can do it, it's you.
All right.
Getting that rolling. Big thank you to this week's guest, Ronald Kessler. If you want to check out his books and his website, we will leave links to them in the show notes description. Please make sure you like, subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts for this pod if you can. Please tell a friend. That really helps. If you want to follow the podcast on Instagram and Twitter, the handle is @thegiantpod. My Instagram is Andy_S1S. This podcast was produced by the sneaky, surreptitious Harry Williams. Thanks again for listening. We will see you next week on The Giant Pod.